We are broadcasting to you live from the Masjidul Quds in Gatesville, Clinic Street in Gatesville in Cape Town. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A hearty good afternoon and welcome to the special broadcast of the Jummah proceedings on this 5th day of Shawwal 1435. We broadcast to you in lieu of a very special guest that is currently touring South Africa under the auspices of Muslim Views and the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions campaign, Dr. Ilan Pappe. He's a visiting doctor, he is an Israeli, and he was one of the Israelis that was hounded out of the country for their stance and their viewpoints about the operations taking place in Israel over the last few years. More specifically, his topic today will be discussing, is Israel an apartheid state? And that will be done just after the Jummah proceedings. In the background you can hear the adhan for Jummah delivered by Faisal Salih, and thereafter inshallah we will be having the khutba delivered by Sheikh Muhammad Fuad Isaacs. I'm Samit Mohsen. Joining me on the crew this afternoon is Nasir Davids, as well as Ashraf Kenny, Matthew, as well as Derek standing by in the Johannesburg studio. This broadcast live from Masjidul Quds in Gatesville, and we will now be having a short interlude and showing you exactly what's happening inside the masjid as we prepare for the khutbah. We are coming to you live from the Masjidul Quds in Gatesville. We've just had the adhan for Jummah, and shortly we'll be having the khutbah. Now, a change in the regular proceedings here today to accommodate the special talk by the visiting Dr. Ilan Pappe. That will be that there will be no English translation or pre-khutbah talk here this afternoon. The Jummah proceedings, the proceedings that make the Jummah valid, the khutbah and the salah will take place within the next few minutes, and thereafter, once the salah has been completed from just after 1:15, inshallah, we'll be having a lecture and a special address by this visiting Dr. Ilan Pappe, who is a guest of Muslim Views and BDS, BDS being the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions campaign. Now, our du'as and our thoughts are with our brothers and sisters in Palestine and Gaza specifically. We are seeing false cries of ceasefires, of medical ceasefires, time for people to recuperate and pull themselves together in between the shelling by the State of Israel on innocent civilians, civilians that are going by their daily tasks to the best of their ability. We've seen people bombed on the day of Eid al-Fitr. We've seen people shelled by F-16 fighter planes through the course of this morning while they are in parks, over the last few weeks while they are in beaches. We here can raise awareness, and we here can also make that extra dua for our brothers and sisters finding themselves in difficulty in Palestine, in Syria, in Gaza, and wherever Muslims may be finding themselves in a state of difficulty. For now, the khutbah will be delivered, and the muaddin on duty is Haji Faisal Salih, and the khutbah delivered today by Sheikh Muhammad Fuad Isaacs. A correction on that, the khutbah will be delivered by Sheikh Abdurrahman Alexander.
أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمدًا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه صلاة وسلاما دائمين متلازمين متتابعين إلى يوم الدين، وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا. فيا أمة التوحيد اتقوا الله ولتنظر نفس ما قدمت لغد، واتقوا الله إن الله خبير بما تعملون. قال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. صدق الله مولانا العظيم. بارك الله لنا ولكم بالقرآن العظيم، ونفعنا وإياكم بالآيات والذكر الحكيم. أقول قولي هذا، أستغفر الله العظيم لي ولكم ولوالدي ولوالديكم ولسائر المسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات، فتوبوا إلى الله إنه كان غفارا.
اللهم صل وسلم وتوالم ودفد وبارك جلالك وكمالك على زين عبادك واشرف عبادك سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى ال سيدنا محمد وصحبه وسلم ورضي الله تبارك وتعالى عن كل.
الحمد لله حمدا كثيرا كما أمر، والصلاة والسلام على سيد البشر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمدًا عبده ورسوله. قال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم، وما أرسلناك إلا رحمة للعالمين. وقال تعالى مخبرا وآمرا قولا كريما: إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد كما صليت على سيدنا إبراهيم وعلى آل سيدنا إبراهيم، وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد كما باركت على سيدنا إبراهيم وعلى آل سيدنا إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. وارض اللهم عن خلفاء الراشدين ساداتنا أبي بكر وعمر وعثمان وعلي رضي الله تعالى عنهم، وعن بقية الصحابة والقرابة والتابعين وتابع التابعين وتابعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين، اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين، اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم اغفر لنا ولوالدينا ولجميع المؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وأدخلنا الجنة مع الأبرار يا عزيز يا غفار يا رب العالمين. اللهم أعد المسجد الأقصى إلى رحاب المسلمين إلى أخوي المسجد الحرام ومسجد النبوي المدني الشريف، آمين يا رب العالمين. عباد الله رحمكم الله، إن الله يأمركم بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر، ولذكر الله تعالى أعلى أولى وأعز وأجل وأتم وأهم وأعظم وأكبر، والله يعلم ما تصنعون. أقيموا الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر، أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح، قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
حقا وصدقا لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم استووا استقيموا واعتدلوا سووا صفوفكم فلا تختلفوا فتختلف قلوبكم الله أكبر بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين كلا إذا بلغت التراقي وقيل من راق وظن أنه الفراق والتفت الساق بالساق إلى ربك يومئذ المساق فلا صدق ولا صلى ولكن كذب وتولى ثم ذهب إلى أهله يتمطى أولى لك فأولى ثم أولى لك فأولى أيحسب الإنسان أن يترك سدى ألم يك نطفة من مني يمنى ثم كان علقة فخلق فسوى فجعل منه الزوجين الذكر والأنثى أليس ذلك بقادر على أن يحيي الموتى الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح ورأيت الناس يدخلون في دين الله أفواجا فسبح بحمد ربك واستغفره إنه كان توابا الله أكبر سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم. كما صليت وبارك على السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. استغفر الله. نستغفر الله العظيم التواب الرحيم الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم، ونتوب إليك ونسألك التوبة والمغفرة والهداية لنا، فإنك أنت التواب الرحيم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، نبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. اللهم أنت السلام ومنك السلام، تباركت يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. سمعنا وأطعنا، غفرانك ربنا وإليك المصير، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. والسلام على المرسلين، والحمد لله رب العالمين.
You're watching a live broadcast of the Jummah proceedings from Masjidul Quds in Gatesville. This is ITV. This broadcast in lieu of a very special visit by Dr. Ilan Pappe. He is a visiting academic, someone that has authored many books, and also a very strong activist about the current situation and the previous situations and incursions in Israel, or Palestine as we prefer to refer to it. And the sad part about it is that civilians are dying, and today we are going to be taking a look. Specifically, he'll be delivering a talk about the current situation in Palestine and the fact or the question whether Israel is in fact an apartheid state. We always hear those questions and claims and statements being made, but today he will point out to us exactly why we can say so and what are the reasons for us being able to say so about the Israeli situation, the current situation with regards to the bombing in Gaza, the bombing along the West Bank, and the general colonization of a land and of a people where their nationality has been stripped away and their nationality trying to be stripped away by the Israelis. We make dua, inshallah, that the Almighty grant that our brothers and sisters in Palestine, those in Syria, those that are finding themselves in difficulty in Egypt, in Chechnya, and all other countries where people are being oppressed, Muslims or non-Muslims, where it is an academic or rather a humanitarian issue, that Allah makes it easy for them, inshallah. Sheikh Abdurrahman Alexander is now giving an introduction and a welcome to the visiting guest, and we hand over to him.
Committee, as well as our entire Jummah, we extend a very hearty and warm welcome to our beloved Professor Ilan Pappe, very eminent and reputable scholar indeed. I've been following him on YouTube and wherever I can get hold of his lectures, and I am blown away with his messages. May Almighty Allah preserve you, Professor, for many more good years, that you can continue the sterling work that you are doing. Because as we are sitting here at the moment, bombs and missiles are raining down upon the poor Palestinian people in the Gaza. And those who are suffering are the Palestinian Muslims and Christians and our innocent Jewish brethren who are opposing the atrocities committed by a Zionist Israeli state. And today the question which is posed, is Israel an apartheid state? Professor Ilan Pappe is here to explain to us. It's the first time in the history of Masjidul Quds that we have such a broad media coverage. And once again, I want to welcome the viewers of SABC TV, the viewers of ITV, the listeners of Channel Islam International, Radio Al-Ansar in Durban, and Radio 786. Without further ado, I call upon Mr. Shabuddin Romani to kindly come forward and introduce our honorable guest, Professor Ilan Pappe. فليتفضل.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. This really is a momentous occasion in many senses. The decision to invite Professor Pappe was taken almost a year ago, and we started to communicate with him. And his presence here today is really not coincidental, it's divine. Because the real purpose of inviting Professor Pappe at the outset was, one, to educate further us in South Africa, so we can, as we've done in defeating apartheid, infect those not only in the African continent, which is what we are capable of doing, but also to extend that infection, in a sense, to the rest of the world, inshallah. I think at the outset I must thank the trustees of Masjidul Quds for honoring us to have accepted this invitation. I think it's a gratuitous gesture on their part. I don't think I want to waste time repeating Professor Pappe's CV. It's available on the internet. As Sheikh Alexander has just mentioned now, he speaks copiously about the issue of Zionism, and we can do our own research. Today, it's more to hear him than for me to repeat his CV. What is more important today is that as Muslim views, in our 55-year history, we've always been one that looked to conscientize and educate our leadership and the general community on issues that requires a moral voice, those of us who've been following Muslim views for the last 50, 55, almost 60 years now, that's always been what Muslim views stands for. In the heydays of apartheid, the paper was banned, and we know Imam Abdullah Harun was murdered, was an editor of the paper, and particularly for the younger in our congregation here today. He was murdered by the security police in 1967. He was an editor of the paper, so it has a rich and very wonderful history. Today, with the wonderful support of Dr. Anwar Nagia and his CAF Trust, Professor Pappe, with other luminaries such as Noam Chomsky, Omar Barghouti, Edward Said, Norman Finkelstein, have sought to provide the world with a truer reflection of the dastardly Zionist project. The Zionist success in perpetuating these mythologies that they always propound through the control of the world media, and hence, importantly, why independent newspapers such as Muslim Views needs to be supported, has allowed those very people to regulate, control the discourse and discussion about the establishment of Israel and its systematic dispossession of a nation, the Palestinian people. It is true that as South Africans, and particularly in the light of the impact that Madiba had on us, we cannot as a nation be free until we continue to fight the oppression of peoples, not only in Palestine, which is paramount, but across the world. Professor Pappe, therefore, is here to further engage us with the historiography of the Zionist project and its impact and its future plans. The intention is not only to listen to him attentively at all the talks that he is about to give on his South African tour, but also at the same time to build a very comprehensive strategy that would result in the decolonization and liberation of not only Muslims, but Christians and Jews in the region from the misplaced supremacy of a criminal and very vile occupation of the lands of a people. Here we have a man of a people talking to a people who I know show both humanity and humanity. Muslim Views, therefore, is proud to present to you Dr. Ilan Pappe. But before he comes, just a reminder that the programs from here onwards, there's something going to be happening at the Community House in Salterburg Road in Salterburg. On Saturday evening, unfortunately, it's not an open invitation, but they'll be broadcast live on ITV, inshallah, a program. Community House, sorry, is tonight. And tomorrow night is, I think we're taking him for a breathing space tomorrow, taking him to a few sightseeing spots, seeing that he is here. Tomorrow night, though, on ITV, on a debate. And then Sunday, please come in your numbers, those who can fit into the hall. Islamia College, a public talk. He's going to talk there, Brand Israel, how Zionism was marketed successfully over the years. And then UWC, lunch hour, Monday afternoon, UCT, 6:30, Monday evening. And then we take him to Durban, and inshallah after that to Johannesburg. Professor Ilan Pappe.
Assalamu alaikum. It's a great pleasure and honor to be in your midst. It's a great honor to be in this holy place and to see so many of you and to be able for the first time to talk personally to each one of you as someone who was born in Palestine and someone who dreams of a free and democratic Palestine for all. I was asked today to answer the question, is Israel an apartheid state? In many ways, the answer could be very short. Khayr kalam maqal wadal, the answer is yes. But we deserve, of course, a bit of elaboration of this question. In order to answer properly this question, and because I am a professor of history, I would go back for a very short period to the history of the Zionist movement in Palestine, because I think the answer to this question lies in the origins of Zionism in Palestine. The Jews who came to Palestine in the late 19th century, seeking refuge in many cases from discrimination and anti-Semitism in Europe, came to a country which was an Arab country, mostly a Muslim country, but a country that respected all three religions that were born there. The people of Palestine were known in their hospitality. And when the early Zionist settlers came, most of them very poor and wretched, they were greeted with welcome by the Palestinians, who thought that they were giving refuge to people who had nowhere else to go. Unfortunately, this hospitality was not reciprocated. The leaders of those Jewish settlers had a different view about what Palestine was and what would be the fate of the Palestinians who lived in it. Even when they were only 10% of the population, they already regarded Palestine as a future Jewish state and craved to take over as much of Palestine as possible and leaving in it as few Palestinians as possible. This ideological stance, this ideological point of view, is still the one that informs Zionism today. And just this examination of the ideology, I think, begins to give us a clear answer to the question. If you have an ideology of a settler movement that arrives at someone else's homeland and dreams of how this homeland would be emptied from its indigenous native population, this ideology is an apartheid ideology. The test of the examination should take us to the implementation of the ideology. Because maybe people harbor bad thoughts about their neighbors, but not everybody acts according to their ideas. So just having a racist view, or just having this ideology that envisages a land that was an Arab, Palestinian country as being a Jewish country, the very thought itself does not turn you into a criminal. But if you're acting according to that thought, then we can accuse you of being part of an apartheid movement. In the 1930s, the Zionist leaders began to contemplate more clearly and more systematically of how to turn the land of Palestine, the Arab land of Palestine, into a Jewish land. At first, they hoped that the British Empire that occupied Palestine in 1918 would do the job for them. They counseled the British Empire to transfer the Palestinians out of Palestine and create in their stead a Jewish state. The British did not accept this proposal, which was made in the 1930s. And in that moment in time, the Zionist leadership decided to do it by itself. It took time before it could enact and implement this ideology. You needed certain monumental events to happen for them to find the opportune moment to try and cleanse Palestine of its indigenous people. And the opportune moment came in 1948. It's an interesting irony of history that apartheid was institutionalized in the same year that the Zionist movement attempted to cleanse Palestine of its indigenous people. The monumentous event that helped the Zionist movement to try for the first time and implement the idea of a Palestine without Palestinians were the Second World War, the Jewish Holocaust in Europe, the end of the British rule in Palestine, and the war of liberations staged in the Arab world against European colonialism that weakened the Arab resolve to help the Palestinian brothers and sisters in 1948. This became a very important juncture in the history of Palestine. And within a year, between February 1948 to February 1949, the Zionist movement and later the State of Israel expelled half of Palestine's population, demolished half of Palestine's villages and built upon them Jewish settlements or planted upon them trees and making them into forest. It also destroyed most of Palestine towns and cities in that year. The world was silent about this ethnic cleansing operation, not because the world did not know what happened. There were a lot of people from the outside world who watched the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. But because the world was both Islamophobic, did not want to deal with what it had done to the Jews and others in the Second World War, it thought that it could buy a Jewish silence by allowing the Zionist movement to cleanse Palestine from its indigenous population. But the ethnic cleansing was not entirely successful. 10% of the Palestinians remained within the State of Israel that stretched over 80% of Palestine between 1948 to 1967. After 1948, Israel continued to expel Palestinians from within the Jewish state. But the steadfastness of that population, sometimes underrated by other people who did not understand what it meant to be a Palestinian minority inside Israel, and their ability to withstand a very harsh military rule that was imposed on them, left a Palestinian presence within Israel. What really turned Israel, however, into apartheid state as we know it in South Africa was the year 1967. Again, an important historical juncture in the history of Palestine. In a different set of circumstances, the Zionist movement found out that it can now stretch not only over 80% of Palestine, but over the whole of Palestine. It exploited the circumstances of 1967 to occupy the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and with that occupation completed the takeover of historical Palestine from the River Jordan to the Mediterranean and from the north to the south. Within the new Israel, within the greater Israel, there was a demographic balance that threatened to defeat the Zionist vision of a Jewish state without any Palestinians in it. Now Israel was in control over millions of Palestinians because of its territorial appetite, because of its wish to control the whole of historical Palestine. And ever since 1967 until today, because there is an equal number of Palestinians and an equal number of Jews between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean, and of course there are 5.5 million Palestinian refugees waiting to return home, because of that reality, the only way you could continue to dream of a Jewish Palestine instead of a Palestinian Palestine was to impose a certain legal, political, and moral regime over all the Palestinians that you either rule directly or indirectly. So the Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip were subjected to the same harsh military rule that has guided Israel in its rule of the Palestinian minority in Israel until 1967. Maybe some of you have lived under military rule, but you will probably share Desmond Tutu's observation when he saw for himself what does it mean to live under military rule in the West Bank. His immediate reaction was, this is worse than apartheid. Because a young sergeant in the Israeli army can decide what would be your fate. Will you have a business to open? Will you be sent to jail without trial? Will your family members be killed or not? It's all in the hands of the gun. It's all in the hands of the army that views you as an enemy in a battlefield and not as a citizen with human rights and civil rights. And that rule continued from 1967 until today in the West Bank and until 2005 in the Gaza Strip. But it was not only an apartheid rule in the sense that people were not allowed the most basic and elementary human rights and civil rights. This was accompanied by colonization, the like of which we've only seen in the 19th century, in this continent and other continents. In the 20th century and in the 21st century, Israel operates a system of colonization that can only be equal to those who happened many, many years ago. And I think one of our problems of explaining to people what goes on in Palestine is that we are witnessing an oppressive 19th century ideology in action in the 21st century. And sometimes we are lost for words because of this gap between these ideologies and how they were executed in the past. The colonization means that Palestinians are robbed of their land, of their water resources, of their freedom of movement from village to village, from village to town, from the West Bank to the Gaza Strip, and from the West Bank and the Gaza Strip to the rest of Palestine. This is far worse than just a system of segregation. This is far worse than just a system of apartheid. This is a slow destruction of a people through the destruction of their infrastructure, their sources of living, their ability to continue and stay in their homeland. The Palestinians who were inside Israel were better and still are better treated than the West Bankers and the people in the Gaza Strip. But they are also subjected to an apartheid system. The complex system of Israel created 13 different legal regimes to try and control the Palestinians. The reason that you have this complex system is that Israel wants to market itself as a liberal democracy. And that's why they have these very careful distinction between Palestinians who live in the Galilee, or Palestinians who live in the West Bank, or Palestinians who live in Gaza. It's also, of course, a method of divide and rule, which we are very familiar from colonialist periods. And in fact, the only way of defeating this divide of rule is unity, which the Palestinians still lack, unfortunately, but hopefully would one way be restored so that we could struggle jointly to make Israel and Palestine, inshallah, a more livable and peaceful place. But our brothers and sisters in the Gaza Strip are at the worst receiving end of this apartheid system. And in fact, if our dear and beloved leader Desmond Tutu felt what he felt when he just saw the West Bank, one wonders what he or anyone else who is a conscientious person would say when he would view personally the carnage in Gaza. If the West Bank is worse than apartheid, I'm lost for words for what's going on in the slaughterhouse of the Gaza Strip. But it's important to understand that the background for these criminal policies are connected to the question that we are asking today. Is Israel an apartheid state? Because I talk to you as someone who was born there. I talk to you as an Israeli Jew who has family, immediate family, distant family, who was part of the system and still believes that Jews, Muslims, and Christians can share the Holy Land of Palestine living together. As someone, exactly as someone like that, I have removed the sunglasses that have blocked my sight for so many years because I was indoctrinated in a way that did not allow me to even see a carnage in Gaza as a carnage, and I was buying into a propaganda. They told me that this is self-defense against barbaric people whose only aim in life is to kill Jews. And unfortunately, most of my countrymen, most of my fellow Israeli Jewish citizens still think that way. So we have a long project of re-educating them by pressuring them from the outside and educating them from within. But for us, it is important to understand that the Gaza Strip is located in such a place in geography, in such a place in politics, between an Egyptian regime that doesn't want to help it, and between an Israeli government that wants to destroy it, that the people have nowhere to go. At least people in the West Bank, people in the rest of Palestine, they have some space to move out of the fire. They have some options, individuals' options, to try and improve slightly the horrible life under military occupation and apartheid inside Israel. But there's no way to go in Gaza. 2 million people locked in an area 40 kilometers long and 5 kilometers wide, mostly an urban space that, if it dares to rebel against more than 15 years of ghettoization, of siege, of starvation, of an incremental genocide, if they dare to resist, the might of the strongest military in the Middle East is poured on them from the sky, from the sea, and from the land. You have to understand, and I'm sure you do, that weapons that were manufactured in Israel, in the United States, to battle against divisions of tanks, against brigades of trained soldiers in the hundreds of thousands, the most advanced lethal weapons that were meant to surrender and subject and defeat huge armies, are being used against a defenseless population locked in an urban space with nowhere to go. People were told in the world, but this is a humane operation because people were warned in Gaza that to leave their homes to a different shelter, then only their homes would be demolished, not their life. But these supposedly secure shelters, which are United Nations schools, hospitals, and mosques, are being bombed as well. So the 500,000, 500,000 Palestinian refugees for the third time in their life. There were refugees in 48, there were refugees in 67, and there are refugees in 2014, who are willing to try and leave their home believing that they may be secure in a United Nations zone, in a school, in a mosque, find that this is actually a fire trap, that probably their home was safer than this supposedly safe haven. The only reason that such a dehumanization can occur is when you dehumanize the other as someone who is not a human being. and I know it from the inside. An Israeli pilot, an Israeli soldier, an Israeli citizen is a decent person. They would not have been able to do what they do had they not dehumanized the Palestinians to such a degree that they don't see them as human beings. And that's when you can indoctrinate people to take part in such a genocidal policy. It's not the first time it happened in history. In fact, the Jews were victims of such dehumanization. And it's a sad chapter in history that the victims of one of the worst kind of dehumanization are using the same methods against the indigenous people of Palestine. But we should be, and I would like to end on a hopeful note. I was born to a Zionist family. I was born in a Zionist Jewish Israel. It took me a long trip to get out of this point of view. I needed to go to England. I needed to research the history by myself. I needed to reconnect with my humanity. It's possible for other Israeli Jews to do the same. And I'm not alone, I'm glad to say. We are a handful, we are few, we are not enough, we are not sufficiently strong, but we do exist. And I'm glad that we do exist, because one day we will build a new Palestine, inshallah. And in that day, it would be important to the new Palestine to remember, as the new South Africa remembered, that not every Jew was part of the killing machine, that not every Israeli Jew was part of the apartheid system, that there were people who were fighting for justice and against oppression. Because only on the basis of this memory you can reconcile, you can build a just solution. And we have to remember, before Zionism arrived in Palestine, and before it became a powerful force in the land, Jews, Muslims, and Christians lived peacefully next to each other, shared the holy places, understood each other, lived in the same villages, lived in the same cities. Today, Palestine is segregated in even a worse kind of matrix of apartheid than South Africa was in the terrible days in the past. But because you have liberated themselves, I am sure and confident we will be able to liberate ourselves. And hopefully next time I'm here, we will talk about the new Palestine we have built and not lament the old one. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Takbir. Allahu Akbar wa lillahi.
Resounding applause and the sounds of takbir for the words of Professor Ilan Pappe delivering a lecture at the Masjidul Quds here in Gatesville. A special thanks to the crew on duty this afternoon, the Masjidul Quds broadcast crew, Siraj Parker, Anwar Umar, Samir Parker, and the camera crew, as well as the ITV crew out here today, Ashraf, Kenny, Matthew from the uplink engineer, and Ken Browley standing by in the Johannesburg studio. From all of us, until we speak to you tomorrow night with the continuation of Professor Ilan Pappe's visit, I bid you Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, fi amanillah, and good afternoon.
We're not going to have any questions.